He thought the restaurant was his private kingdom. When Robert grabbed Elena's wrist and squeezed until her face went pale, he thought the ambient dinner noise would cover her quiet gasp of pain. He thought the other diners would do what they always did: look away, mind their business, pretend they didn't see. He didn't notice the elderly woman at table 12 slowly folding her napkin. He didn't see her stand up with the deliberate slowness of someone who made a final decision. And he definitely didn't know that his entire world was about to collapse in front of a room full of witnesses. The Charleston restaurant buzzed with Saturday evening energy. Families celebrated birthdays, couples enjoyed date nights, and the sound of silverware on china mixed with laughter and conversation. The warm lighting from pendant lamps created an atmosphere of comfort and celebration. Elena Martinez sat across from her husband at a corner table, trying to make herself invisible. It was their third wedding anniversary. Though calling it a celebration felt wrong. Robert had chosen the restaurant, chosen her dress, chosen what time they'd arrive. She'd learned over 3 years of marriage that having opinions only led to consequences. The faded floral dress she wore had once been her favorite. Now it just reminded her of the woman she used to be, the one who smiled freely and laughed without fear. The makeup she'd carefully applied that evening barely covered the healing bruise near her temple from last Tuesday, when she'd accidentally burned his dinner. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at the menu, though she already knew what would happen. Robert would order for her. He always did, and then he'd spend the entire meal explaining everything she was doing wrong. Robert sat back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences. His expensive polo shirt and designer watch announced his status to anyone watching. He checked his phone constantly, making Elena wait in silence until he was ready to acknowledge her existence. When the waiter arrived, Robert ordered for both of them without asking Elena what she wanted. He chose the cheapest entree on the menu for her and the most expensive steak for himself. When Elena quietly mentioned she was allergic to shellfish and the dish he'd ordered contained shrimp, Robert's face darkened immediately. His voice grew louder as he told her she was being difficult, that she was embarrassing him, that she always found something to complain about. The surrounding tables began to notice. Elena apologized quickly, her voice barely a whisper, and told the waiter the dish was fine, she'd just eat around the shrimp. Robert wasn't finished. He started criticizing the way she was sitting, telling her she looked like a child instead of a grown woman. He commented on her weight, suggesting the cheapest entree was probably too much food for her anyway. He snapped his fingers at her when she wasn't making eye contact, literally snapping like she was a dog that needed to pay attention. Elena's eyes filled with tears she didn't dare let fall. She knew crying in public would make everything worse. She reached for her water glass with a shaking hand, and some water sloshed onto the tablecloth. Robert's expression turned venomous. He told her she was pathetic, that she couldn't do anything right, that he didn't know why he'd married such a useless woman. The food arrived, and Robert's criticism intensified. He told Elena she was eating wrong, chewing too loudly, holding her fork incorrectly. Other diners were openly staring now, but no one said anything. Everyone just watched and stayed silent. Elena's breathing became shallow. The anxiety was building into a panic attack, something she'd struggled with for the past year. She quietly asked Robert if they could please leave, if they could just take the food to go and finish at home. She promised she'd be better, promised she'd stop embarrassing him. Robert's hand shot across the table and grabbed her wrist. Not gently. His fingers dug into her skin hard enough to leave immediate red marks. He told her through clenched teeth that they would leave when he decided, not when she got emotional and weak. He told her to sit there, shut up, and finish her food like a normal person. Elena's face went pale with pain, but she didn't pull away. She'd learned that resistance only made things worse. A single tear escaped down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. apologizing again in a whisper so quiet it barely qualified as sound. If this breaks your heart, if you believe no one deserves to be treated this way, please hit the like button and subscribe. These stories save lives by raising awareness. Dorothy Chun had been watching the couple for the past 20 minutes at 68 years old. After 40 years as a family therapist specializing in domestic abuse cases, she recognized the signs immediately. The way Elena made herself smaller, the way she apologized for breathing, the flinch when Robert moved too quickly, the careful monitoring of his mood in every micro-expression. Dorothy had retired 5 years ago, but you never really stop being a therapist. You never stop seeing the patterns, and you never stop feeling the responsibility to act. When Robert grabbed Elena's wrist, Dorothy made her decision. She carefully folded her napkin, placed it beside her unfinished meal, and stood up from her table. Her movements were slow and deliberate as she walked the few steps to their table. She didn't ask permission. She simply pulled out the empty chair at their table and sat down. Robert's face showed confusion first, then irritation. He told Dorothy this was a private dinner and demanded she leave. He still had Elena's wrist in his grip. Though his hold loosened slightly in his surprise, Dorothy ignored him completely. She looked directly at Elena and asked, in a voice that was gentle but carried clearly to several nearby tables, if Elena felt safe. She asked if Elena needed help. She asked if Elena wanted to leave this restaurant right now. Robert's face flushed red. He told Dorothy to mind her own business, that this was between him and his wife, that he'd call the manager and have her removed. Dorothy still didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Elena, waiting for an answer. Elena's voice was so quiet it was almost inaudible. She said she was fine, that everything was okay, that this was just a misunderstanding. The words were automatic, rehearsed from years of covering up the truth. Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. She told Elena that she was a retired therapist who'd worked with abuse survivors for 4 decades. She said she recognized what she was seeing. She placed the card on the table in front of Elena, and on the back of the card was written the domestic violence hotline number. Robert finally released Elena's wrist and turned his full attention to Dorothy. He started speaking loudly about lawsuits, about defamation, about how dare she accuse him of abuse when she knew nothing about their marriage. His voice carried through the entire restaurant now. Several diners had their phones out, though whether to call for help or record, it wasn't clear. Dorothy finally looked at Robert. Her voice remained calm but carried absolute authority. She told him that she'd witnessed him verbally abuse his wife. For 20 minutes, she'd watched him control every aspect of her behavior. She'd seen him grab her wrist hard enough to leave marks that were already visible. She informed him that she'd already asked the waiter to call the police and that several nearby diners had recorded portions of his behavior. Robert's confident demeanor cracked. He looked around and realized that yes, multiple people were watching, recording, documenting. The manager appeared at the table, looking uncomfortable but determined. Dorothy spoke to the manager directly, explaining what she'd witnessed and requesting that the police be called if they hadn't been already. Robert tried to salvage the situation. He stood up quickly, told Elena they were leaving immediately, and reached for her arm again. Dorothy stood as well, positioning herself between Robert and Elena. She told Robert that if he touched Elena again, if he tried to remove her from this restaurant, she would personally ensure that assault charges were filed with video evidence. Elena sat frozen, her mind unable to process what was happening. Dorothy knelt beside her chair and spoke in that same gentle voice. She told Elena that she had choices. She could leave with Robert if she wanted, but she didn't have to. She could stay here where there were witnesses and wait for police to arrive. She could call the domestic violence hotline on that card right now. She told Elena that help existed, that she deserved better, that this wasn't love. The manager confirmed police were on the way. Robert, realizing the situation was spiraling beyond his control, made one last attempt at manipulation. He told Elena that if she humiliated him like this, their marriage was over and she'd have nothing. Dorothy responded before Elena could speak. She told Robert that threats in front of witnesses were exceptionally unwise, and that everything he was saying was being recorded. 2 police officers arrived within 10 minutes. Dorothy calmly explained what she'd witnessed. The officers spoke to Elena separately, away from Robert. The restaurant provided security footage. Other diners gave statements. Elena's wrist showed clear finger-shaped bruises. Robert left the restaurant in handcuffs, charged with assault and disturbing the peace. Dorothy stayed with Elena for 2 hours. She called a domestic violence shelter, arranged immediate safe housing, and helped Elena pack a bag from her home with a police escort. She gave Elena her personal phone number and told her to call anytime, day or night. Elena spent 3 months in the shelter, working with counselors, rebuilding her sense of self. The divorce was finalized within a year. Robert faced consequences, including mandatory anger management, a restraining order, and a criminal record that followed him into every new relationship. Dorothy and Elena remained in contact. Years later, Elena would become a domestic violence counselor herself, helping other women find the courage she'd found in a Charleston restaurant when a stranger refused to look away. Silence protects abusers. Speaking up saves lives. It's not easy to intervene. It's uncomfortable and scary, and you might be wrong. But if you're right, if that person needs help, your voice might be the only one they hear telling them they deserve better. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever witnessed domestic abuse in public? Did you intervene or regret staying silent? Share your thoughts below, and remember that one person speaking up can change someone's entire life.